Today, we're uncovering critical developments that could shift the entire Ukraine conflict. The fall of Selidovo, NATO weapons shipments up in flames, and even reports of North Korean troops joining the battlefield all signal a turning point. According to military experts like Scott Ritter and Colonel Douglas Macgregor, these events expose cracks in Ukraine's strategy and reveal how NATO's support is facing severe challenges. Stay tuned as we dive into these shocking updates.
Well, they are providing weaponry. The question of troops is a tough one. If you go back in history, you'll see, for instance, in the Korean War, there were Russian pilots, Soviet pilots flying in the Korean Air Force. During the Vietnam War, Russians were manning the air defense systems. During the Yom Kippur War and in the War of Attrition leading up to that, there were Russian pilots manning the Egyptian MiGs. If Iran wants to incorporate, let's say Russia provides Su-35 fighters, advanced Generation 4 plus fighters. If Russia provides these fighters, the Iranian pilots aren't up to speed. It takes 6 months to a year to transition into a new airframe, especially one that's of that complexity. So there's every reason to believe that Russia might be providing pilots during this interim period to make that aircraft combat capable and ready to use. Now, and the same thing applies with the S-400 surface-to-air missile that Russia has provided to Iran.
Hello and welcome to our in-depth analysis of the Ukrainian battlefield directly on the map. In this video, we will dive into the strategies and maneuvers from both sides through a military lens. This is a crucial update as Russian forces have launched a major offensive near Vuhledar, targeting the Kupiansk front. Simultaneously, new developments are unfolding across Kursk and along the Zhdivizh River. According to military insights, including those from Inspector Scott Ritter, we will explore how these maneuvers are reshaping the battlefield. Let's dive deeper into these developments, starting with the volatile Kursk region. The battle in the Kursk region has evolved dramatically over the past days, with Russian forces holding strategic positions despite relentless Ukrainian counterattacks. The towns of Novovoyevnivka and Zeleny remain firmly under Russian control, frustrating Ukrainian attempts to dislodge them from fortified positions. Ukrainian forces employed a mix of mechanized brigades and artillery barrages, striking from both the north and south to try and fracture Russian lines. However, the Russians, using advanced minefields and anti-tank defenses, blunted these offensives. What sets this battle apart is the role of the Snagus River. Acting as a natural boundary, it has bolstered Russia's defensive strategy in the region. Ukrainian forces attempted to breach the river at several points but were repelled, often finding themselves isolated on the wrong side. Russian engineers have constructed pontoon bridges across key sections of the river, allowing supply convoys and reinforcements to flow seamlessly, ensuring no disruption to logistics. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces, unable to maintain a stable foothold across the river, have been forced to abandon certain forward positions. Isolated units are now scattered, vulnerable to Russian encirclement tactics, creating opportunities for Russian forces to launch local offensives. The new front line along the Snagus River has become the site of fierce combat, as small settlements like Dorino and Nikolaev Dorino are engulfed in battle. Russian artillery units maintain relentless pressure, reducing Ukrainian positions to rubble. Observers argue that these defensive moves not only stabilize the region but also set the stage for future Russian operations aimed at deeper Ukrainian-held areas. We now shift our focus to Vuhledar, where Russian forces are executing one of the most aggressive offensives seen in recent weeks. The offensive in Vuhledar marks one of the most ambitious Russian operations in the campaign so far. Russian forces have coordinated multiple attacks across different axes, seeking to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses through rapid maneuver warfare. A significant breakthrough has taken place along the Zoloda-Nyva-Shakhtarsky corridor, with Russian units capturing key positions near Shakhtarsky. This town, positioned at a critical crossroads, offers a staging ground for deeper Russian advances toward Ukrainian rear areas. At the same time, Russian mechanized brigades are advancing from Bohoyavlenka toward Novokrenka, aiming to encircle Ukrainian forces and trap them in a shrinking pocket. This dual-pronged assault reflects the precision with which Russian forces have been conducting their operations, systematically isolating and weakening Ukrainian defensive lines. Further west, Russian forces near Pobjeda are executing a flanking maneuver intended to envelop Ukrainian defensive positions from the north. Concentrated artillery bombardments have already crippled key Ukrainian defensive points, leaving many units exposed to further attacks. The situation in Herniki exemplifies this dynamic. The city is now almost entirely under Russian control, with only small groups of Ukrainian defenders holding out in isolated pockets. Under growing pressure, Ukrainian forces have begun a phased withdrawal from Hernik, abandoning some strategic positions to regroup further south. With Russian forces tightening their grip on Volodar, Ukrainian commanders are struggling to maintain cohesive front lines. This evolving situation aligns with developments in Selidovo, where Russian operations are on the verge of delivering a decisive blow. The battle for Selidovo marks one of the most pivotal moments in the ongoing conflict. Within just 48 hours, Russian forces executed a series of coordinated operations that led to the capture of nearly 90% of the town. These maneuvers, carefully planned and executed, overwhelmed Ukrainian defenses at critical junctures. The southeastern sector fell entirely under Russian control early in the offensive, and by the following day, Russian troops had seized the southern districts as well. The Ukrainian defenders put up a fierce resistance, leveraging the dense urban terrain to slow the Russian advance. Apartment complexes became makeshift fortresses, with Ukrainian units entrenched inside, attempting to repel Russian assaults. However, Russian troops, operating with precision and discipline, breached these fortified positions one by one. The urban warfare demonstrated Russia's ability to adapt its tactics, employing small unit maneuvers and combined arms strategies to outflank and isolate Ukrainian forces. As the fighting dragged on, Ukrainian units in Selidovo became increasingly fragmented. Supply chains were disrupted, communication lines severed, and coordination between units broke down. Many Ukrainian soldiers found themselves operating in isolation without access to reinforcements or resupply. The strategic significance of Selidovo's fall cannot be overstated. Military analysts, including Inspector Scott Ritter, emphasize that this victory extends beyond tactical gains. It provides Russia with a significant foothold in the region, positioning them for deeper advances toward Kurakov and potentially other key urban centers in the Ukrainian rear. This victory places the remaining Ukrainian defenders in a precarious position. As their forces retreat westward toward Krivika, they are moving into areas with fewer natural or man-made defenses, leaving them increasingly vulnerable to further Russian advances. At the same time, Russian forces are consolidating control over Selidovo's remaining districts, preparing for follow-up operations that could destabilize Ukrainian lines even further. Selidovo's capture also serves as a warning of what may come next. Russian forces are gaining not just territory but also operational momentum, forcing Ukrainian troops into defensive positions across multiple fronts. The battle demonstrates how sustained pressure and well-coordinated assaults can lead to the collapse of even heavily defended urban areas. As Russian forces regroup for the next phase, Ukrainian commanders are left scrambling to reorganize their units, attempting to halt Russian advances along new defensive lines. But as the situation unfolds, it becomes increasingly clear that Russia's victory in Selidovo could signal the unraveling of Ukrainian control in this region. With this victory, Russian forces have secured a strategic advantage that positions them for further operations toward Kurakov and beyond. As they build on this momentum, the Ukrainian side faces the growing challenge of stabilizing its defenses along an ever-expanding front. Next, we will examine how these recent gains fit into Russia's broader plans for the region and the implications for the battles to come. The battle for Crimea has become a pivotal operation in Russia's broader strategy to secure the Eastern Front. Russian forces are methodically breaching Ukrainian defenses, gaining control over key roads that link Crimea to Selidovo and Novomytrivka. The capture of these roads ensures that Russian supply routes remain uninterrupted while restricting Ukrainian resupply and reinforcement efforts in the area. The Selidovo River has become a natural boundary for Russian advances. With new pontoon bridges set up along this river, Russia is moving reinforcements and supplies efficiently. On the Ukrainian side, however, fallback positions are becoming increasingly vulnerable. Recent Ukrainian reports highlight significant losses, as artillery strikes along the river have disrupted attempts to regroup. Strategically, the capture of Kremenna gives Russian forces a major foothold for future offensives deeper into Ukrainian-held territory. The terrain also favors Russian advances, as the river and forested regions nearby allow them to maneuver their artillery units into key positions, maintaining relentless pressure on Ukrainian defenders. The heavy fighting in Crimea continues as Russian forces aim to sever Ukrainian supply routes, cutting off reinforcements from the western and northern sectors. Ukrainian units positioned along the river are struggling to hold their ground under constant bombardment, with many commanders reporting dwindling supplies and increasing casualties. This operation echoes the type of precise military strategy emphasized by Inspector Scott Ritter, who has long observed that Russian forces excel in these methodical, grinding campaigns designed to isolate and incapacitate Ukrainian defensive positions. With the situation growing increasingly dire in Crimea, Ukrainian units will have to reposition quickly if they hope to hold critical points along the Eastern Front. The encirclement of Selidovo is a textbook example of how Russian forces leverage strategic envelopment to overwhelm defenders. Nearly every escape route for Ukrainian troops in the area has been cut off, with only one narrow corridor to the north remaining accessible, and even that road is under heavy Russian artillery fire. The Ukrainian defenders, now trapped within the shrinking pocket in Selidovo, are facing severe logistical challenges. Supplies of ammunition, food, and medical equipment are running dangerously low, and communication with rear command has been largely severed by Russian electronic warfare units. As the pressure mounts, Ukrainian commanders are being forced to make difficult decisions, either fight to hold their positions or attempt a risky withdrawal under cover of night. At night, Ukrainian units are attempting to slip past Russian forces using covert routes. However, Russian drones equipped with infrared cameras are tracking these movements, and Russian artillery continues to shell retreat paths, making any escape perilous. As Scott Ritter noted in a recent analysis, this kind of encirclement operation is intended to cripple Ukrainian supply chains and exhaust the defenders' remaining combat capability, effectively neutralizing them without the need for large-scale direct engagements. With the grip tightening, Russian forces are expected to press their advantage in the coming days. Ukrainian forces in Selidovo are not only fighting for survival, but also attempting to maintain enough pressure to prevent a total collapse along the southern front. This desperate situation connects directly to broader operations across the front lines, where Russian forces are seeking to extend their momentum further west. The current strategic picture along the Ukrainian front lines reveals that Russian forces have made several crucial gains, particularly to the east of Kharkiv. Russian units have successfully captured additional residential areas within Hernik, further shrinking Ukrainian-controlled territory. As Ukrainian forces attempt to regroup in Kharkivka, they face severe logistical challenges. The disrupted supply lines, compounded by continuous Russian artillery fire, are forcing Ukrainian defenders to ration resources and limit offensive operations. Meanwhile, Russian advances along the Zydivizh River point toward a strategic thrust toward Torsky. Control over this corridor would not only solidify Russian gains, but also open a pathway into the Serbryanka forest, a vital area that could serve as a staging ground for deeper operations toward Lyman. Military strategists emphasize the importance of securing the forest, as it would provide natural cover for artillery units and infantry columns. This advantage could allow Russian forces to flank Ukrainian positions from multiple directions. However, failure to fully control the forest presents significant risks. Ukrainian forces, skilled in guerrilla-style warfare in wooded areas, could exploit gaps to launch disruptive attacks on Russian supply convoys. If Russian forces succeed in their campaign to capture the forest, a new offensive toward Lyman would be almost inevitable. Lyman, strategically positioned on key supply routes, could become the next major objective in Russia's eastern operations. Many analysts have observed that Russian efforts in this area reflect a methodical approach, aiming to exhaust Ukrainian defenses step by step while consolidating key points to facilitate further offensives. The situation remains highly fluid, and the next phase of operations will likely hinge on how well each side manages its resources and secures its strategic positions in the coming days. To summarize, Russian forces have achieved significant gains across multiple fronts. From the heavy fighting in Volodar and Kharkiv to the methodical advances in Crimea and the near-complete takeover of Selidovo, Russian troops are driving Ukrainian forces into increasingly difficult positions. While Ukrainian forces are holding key positions, their ability to sustain these defenses is becoming increasingly tenuous. Supply chains are strained, troop morale is being tested, and with each passing day, Russian forces are consolidating their positions for future offensives. The upcoming days will be critical in determining the trajectory of the conflict. If Russia maintains its momentum, it could deliver a decisive blow to Ukrainian defenses. On the other hand, if Ukraine can regroup and launch effective counteroffensives, they might slow or even reverse some of the Russian gains. As Inspector Scott Ritter suggests, the coming days are crucial. Both sides are vying for control, but strategic planning and resource management will ultimately decide the outcome of this phase of the conflict. In any case, the conflict is far from over. Both sides are locked in a battle, not just for territory, but for strategic dominance. The unfolding events will shape not only the front lines, but the political and military landscape of the region in the weeks to come. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on the latest developments from the battlefield. Your engagement helps us bring you the most accurate and timely information. See you in the next video.
So this is effectively over on the ground. I'm sure the Russians will advance when they feel comfortable doing so. The real question is, how much damage do they do to what I just described, to our intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance complex? I hope that people are more thoughtful than they've been thus far and will keep at least our manned aircraft out of range. But as the Russians advance towards the west, towards that river, they'll be able to take more and more things under fire and destroy them. That's the concern that I have.
Welcome to today's Battlefield Report, where we dive deep into the latest developments on the Ukrainian front lines. Over the past 24 hours, we've witnessed critical moments shaping the war, with Russian forces pressing forward on several key axes. South Donetsk, Bohoyavlenka, Kupiansk, names that dominate today's strategic discussion. Stay tuned as we break it all down, analyze the advances, and expose Ukraine's desperate attempts to hold their collapsing positions. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor aptly pointed out in his recent commentary, Russian successes are building momentum faster than Ukraine can respond. And if the West thinks pouring weapons into this conflict will change the outcome, they're deluding themselves. Let's dive straight into the battlefield. Let's start at Staromayersky, where Russian forces have launched a decisive offensive. The starting point is Zolota, a strategic location that allows Russian troops to exploit the weak spots in Ukrainian defenses. What we're seeing here is classic Russian maneuver warfare. They're using terrain to their advantage, advancing methodically while maintaining a constant pressure on the Ukrainians. Over the past 24 hours alone, they've managed to push forward more than 6 kilometers, a significant gain in such a heavily contested area. This operation along the transportation routes has been meticulously planned. These routes are critical. They're not just supply lines, but they allow the Russians to outmaneuver Ukrainian forces who are struggling to reposition. The Ukrainian defenders have been scrambling to hold their lines, but it's clear they're losing ground faster than they can react. The battle is now concentrated on the southern outskirts of Shakhtarsky, and this is where things are getting particularly intense. The sheer scale of Russia's advance is staggering. Shakhtarsky is a key objective, and the Russian military is treating it as such. Russian control now spans dozens of square kilometers across the southern Donetsk region, and this isn't just some symbolic victory, it's a strategic one. Every village, every kilometer counts. The momentum is firmly in Russia's favor, and they are pushing deeper into Ukrainian-held territory, creating a growing sense of inevitability for the defenders. And let's not forget, this isn't a hasty, reckless assault. The Russian forces are employing a well-coordinated mix of ground troops, armored vehicles, and long-range artillery, all working in tandem. Ukrainian reinforcements have been pouring in, but they are struggling to stabilize the front. We've seen multiple attempts by the Ukrainians to regroup and counterattack, but each time they are met with devastating Russian artillery fire, drones, and mechanized units pushing them back further and further. You have to ask yourself, how long can Ukraine hold out here? They're running out of options, and more importantly, out of time. The reports coming in suggest that Ukrainian forces are stretched to the limit. Morale is low, supply lines are disrupted, and the leadership in Kyiv is increasingly disconnected from the harsh realities on the ground. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has pointed out in his recent analysis that the Ukrainian military is facing a critical breaking point in this region. They are outgunned, outmaneuvered, and frankly, out of time. The Russian forces, meanwhile, show no signs of slowing down. Each day brings new reports of Russian gains, and if you thought this was just a minor skirmish, think again. Russia's plans go far beyond Shakhtarsky, and every victory here is setting the stage for larger operations to come. And if you thought the action stops there, think again. Russia's attack on Bohoyavlenka is already reshaping the dynamics on this front, and the situation is escalating rapidly. Now let's turn our focus to Bohoyavlenka, another critical area where Russian forces are ramping up their assault. Following the fall of Volodar, the Russians have been relentless in this sector, and today the situation has escalated to new heights. Russian artillery strikes, precision drone attacks, and tactical bombing raids have made Bohoyavlenka one of the most dangerous places on the front line for Ukrainian troops. The intensity of the firepower being unleashed here is unmatched. Every day feels like doomsday for the Ukrainian forces trying to hold on to the settlement. Take a look at this footage recorded from the South Donbass coal mine No. 3. The bombardment is absolutely brutal. You can see waves of explosions tearing through Ukrainian positions, leaving them with little to no time to recover. What's crucial to understand here is the strategic significance of Bohoyavlenka. This isn't just a random target, it's a linchpin in Ukraine's defensive network in the region. Russian forces are employing a three-pronged strategy aimed at overwhelming Ukrainian defenses from multiple directions. The first prong is focused on smashing the southern defensive line directly below the settlement. The second prong comes from the southeast, a clever flanking maneuver designed to trap Ukrainian forces from behind. And the third, a western encirclement moving through the agricultural areas to cut off any escape routes. This isn't just about brute force, it's about precision, coordination, and timing. Each of these prongs is working in concert to systematically dismantle Ukraine's ability to defend Bohoyavlenka. If this triple-pronged offensive succeeds, and by all accounts, it's already showing signs of doing so, Ukraine's forces in Novokranka will be in an impossible position. The encirclement of Novokranka is almost guaranteed if the Russians keep up this pace. The Ukrainian forces there will have no choice but to retreat northward to Maximivka, where the terrain offers them little advantage. Let's be clear, this isn't just speculation. We've seen the same pattern play out time and time again across the southern Donetsk front. Russian forces are outflanking Ukrainian positions, cutting off their supply lines, and leaving them with no room to maneuver. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor recently noted, Russia's use of these layered multi-directional assaults is a key factor in their success on the battlefield. Ukraine, on the other hand, is running out of resources, manpower, and strategic options to counter these offensives. The Ukrainian military, facing these Russian tactics, has tried to bring in reinforcements, but the reality on the ground is that they are simply too late. The lines are breaking, and once again, Russia's superior artillery and drone warfare are proving decisive. Reports from the ground indicate that Ukrainian morale is plummeting, and soldiers are questioning whether they can continue holding this line as they watch their comrades fall and their defensive positions get decimated. But Bohoyavlenka isn't the only pocket of chaos on this front. As we shift our attention to Kurakivka, we'll see that the situation there is reaching critical mass, and it's only a matter of time before the kettle boils over. Now let's zoom in on Kurakivka, where Russian forces are applying relentless pressure on the coal mine No. 42, a critical asset for both strategic and symbolic reasons. The significance of this location cannot be overstated. If Russian forces seize the mine, it will cut off Ukrainian defenses at Kurdyumivka and Ivan-Ivanivsky, placing these positions on the verge of collapse. These two towns form an essential part of Ukraine's southern defense line, and if breached, they risk falling like dominoes, opening the way for Russian advances deeper into the region. Reports from both Russian and independent military sources suggest that the noose around Kurakivka is tightening by the hour. Ukrainian units are scrambling to reposition, but it's becoming increasingly clear they are running out of time. With every passing moment, Russia's advance makes it harder for Ukrainian troops to extract themselves from the encirclement. According to Colonel Douglas Macgregor, Russian commanders are likely planning a pincer movement originating from Avdiivka. This maneuver is designed to close the encirclement around Kurakivka and eliminate any remaining escape routes. If this plan succeeds, and there's every reason to believe it will, Ukrainian forces inside the Kurakivka pocket will be left with two options: surrender or face complete annihilation. The situation on the ground reflects a grim reality for the Ukrainian defenders. Their logistical lines are under constant fire, making it increasingly difficult to deliver ammunition, reinforcements, or medical supplies. Ukrainian units that remain inside the kettle are now operating under extreme pressure, knowing that if the Russians succeed, this front will collapse completely. And just when you think things couldn't get any worse, our next stop at Selidovo reveals another critical area where Ukrainian forces are buckling under Russian pressure. Let's now move to Selidovo, where the situation is deteriorating rapidly for Ukrainian forces. The collapse of Ukrainian positions in the sector has already begun, with Russian troops advancing street by street through the city's northern districts. Multiple reports indicate that the first key streets have fallen, and Ukrainian defenders are now pinned down in District 11, a densely built urban area. If these reports are accurate, any chance for a Ukrainian withdrawal is slipping away, leaving their troops in an increasingly dire position. The collapse here isn't just limited to the northern sectors. Russian forces have launched simultaneous offensives from the south, aiming to create a double-pronged attack that will encircle any remaining Ukrainian units. Even Ukrainian sources, typically optimistic about their defense efforts, are sounding the alarm. The local command knows that if Russian troops succeed in their northern and southern advances, Selidovo will become another city where Ukrainian forces find themselves surrounded, cut off from reinforcements, and forced to either surrender or face complete destruction. This is a pattern we've seen repeated across several fronts, Russian forces employing pincer movements, closing escape routes, and isolating pockets of resistance. Ukrainian commanders are running out of options. If the Russians complete the encirclement, there will be no safe way out for the Ukrainian units trapped in District 11. It's becoming increasingly clear that Selidovo is poised to fall entirely into Russian hands in the coming days. Once the city is secured, the Russians will be able to redirect their focus toward other key objectives in the region, with devastating consequences for Ukraine's broader defensive efforts. The picture only gets grimmer as we shift our focus to Toretsk, where fleeting Ukrainian success may not be enough to change the course of this conflict. Let's take a closer look at Toretsk, where recent reports indicate that Ukrainian forces have launched a counteroffensive, reclaiming most of Zabalka, a small residential area on the outskirts of the town. While the victory might seem like a morale booster for Ukrainian troops, it's important to keep this development in perspective. The overall strategic picture remains grim. Russian drone surveillance is constant, and artillery strikes are ongoing, preventing the Ukrainian forces from consolidating their position in Zabalka. Every gain they make is met with swift retaliation from Russian units. While this minor tactical success might delay the inevitable for a moment, it is far from decisive. Russian forces remain firmly entrenched around Toretsk, ready to launch a renewed offensive at any time. The reconnaissance footage suggests that Russian commanders are meticulously mapping out Ukrainian positions, waiting for the right moment to strike and regain lost ground. Meanwhile, the nearby Chasiv sector is becoming a flashpoint. Both sides are bringing in reinforcements, with Russian units digging in and preparing for a decisive confrontation. If Chasiv falls, it will open up a strategic corridor for Russian forces to advance towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, major logistical hubs that Ukraine cannot afford to lose. The outcome of the battle here could have far-reaching consequences, potentially tipping the balance of the war in Russia's favor. The situation here is a perfect example of the ebb and flow of modern warfare. Small, tactical victories are often overshadowed by broader strategic realities. As Russian forces consolidate their strength, the Ukrainian defenders in Chasiv know that they are facing an uphill battle. Their only hope lies in stalling the Russian advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive from other sectors. But given Russia's superior firepower and the growing exhaustion among Ukrainian forces, time may not be on their side. Now, let's move to Kupiansk, where Russian advances are creating new vulnerabilities along the front, and every kilometer gained is a step closer to encirclement. Now, let's shift our attention to Kupiansk, a key sector where the fighting is intensifying. Russian forces have made notable progress around Terny, advancing steadily despite fierce Ukrainian resistance. This sector has become a focal point of the conflict, and updates from the battlefield suggest that map changes are expected in the coming days. The battle for Kupiansk is far from over, but the pressure is mounting and Ukrainian forces are showing signs of strain. The situation for the Ukrainian defenders is becoming increasingly precarious. With every advance, Russian forces are tightening their grip, leaving Ukrainian units with fewer options. Attempts to launch counterattacks have yielded little success, as Russian artillery and drones continue to dominate the battlefield. The relentless pressure from Russian forces is forcing Ukrainian commanders to consider difficult choices: either hold their positions and risk encirclement or pull back to avoid being cut off entirely. This is a crucial moment for both sides. If the Russians maintain their momentum and secure the Kupiansk sector, they will not only threaten Ukraine's northeastern defenses, but also force a realignment of Ukrainian forces from other fronts, weakening their positions elsewhere. At this point, it's becoming evident that Russia's objective is to encircle key Ukrainian units, cutting them off from reinforcements and isolating them in pockets of resistance. Should Russian forces succeed in closing these gaps, the Ukrainian defenders will find themselves trapped with few viable options left. Colonel Douglas Macgregor recently remarked that Russian forces are employing a systematic grinding approach in areas like Kupiansk, slow but deliberate advances that wear down Ukrainian defenses over time. This strategy is proving effective, leaving Ukraine with little breathing room to regroup or plan a counteroffensive. We now shift our gaze to Kursk, where the stakes are escalating and new players have entered the battlefield, hinting at even larger developments to come. According to President Putin, 2,000 Ukrainian troops are trapped near Kursk, though Kiev insists otherwise. However, what's certain is the appearance of North Korean units in the region, a development that could dramatically alter the battlefield. With the Duma ratifying a strategic partnership with North Korea, it's clear Russia is playing a long game. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor speculates, the involvement of North Korean troops offers Russia the flexibility to redistribute elite forces to other fronts, possibly Zaporizhia. And with Zaporizhia in mind, we end our report with a look at the growing tension there. As the battlefield continues to shift, one thing remains clear: Russia's strategy is working. Ukraine is stretched thin, relying on dwindling Western aid and facing tactical encirclements across multiple fronts. With new alliances forming, such as the cooperation with North Korea, Russia is poised to outlast and outmaneuver its opponents. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor puts it, this war isn't about winning battles, it's about breaking the opponent's will. And from what we've seen today, Russia is well on its way to doing just that. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates, and we'll see you on the next Battlefield Report.
I have trouble with Biden because I regard him as a windsock. Throughout most of his career, he's simply blown with the wind. He's saddled up with whatever the majority thought at a given point in time. But the other thing is, this is very important. The most meaningful discussions and negotiations with foreign powers occur behind the scenes. They're secret. You don't discuss anything of real importance publicly. It's sort of like, people hold summits. Well, yeah, but you hold a summit when you think you've got an 80 to 90% probability of the two sides agreeing to something. You don't have a summit when people are categorically opposed to each other. You have to talk your way into a summit. So I think the problem is, very simply, we don't have anybody that understands how to conduct diplomacy, and we have this bad habit of posturing as morally superior.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another update from the front lines, where Russia continues to achieve milestone after milestone. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has been vocal about how Ukraine is essentially trapped in an unwinnable situation, and today's updates only reinforce that fact. We have some major stories to dive into, stories that once again underscore Ukraine's inability to hold the line, despite the West pumping in resources that seem to disappear faster than they arrive. We'll take you through the latest developments, including significant battlefield statistics, Ukrainian losses, and the staggering destruction of their most prized air defense system, the Patriot. We also have to mention the recent precision strikes on Ukraine's naval supply lines. Yes, folks, Russia has been systematically taking apart Ukraine's logistics by land and sea. But first, let's begin with the numbers from the battlefield. And trust me, these numbers are not good for Ukraine. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has pointed out numerous times that Ukraine's losses are unsustainable. And today's numbers only confirm this grim reality. Let's start with today's battlefield casualties. Ukraine, once again, finds itself suffering tremendous losses, 1,850 soldiers to be precise. Now, while some might see this as an improvement, considering they had been losing over 2,000 soldiers per day, the reality is this: Ukraine is still bleeding. This marks the third time in recent days that their losses have dropped below 2,000, and while that might sound like a relief for some, it's a clear sign that their manpower is being drained to the point where they can't even afford to put more soldiers on the field. Kursk saw 100 Ukrainian soldiers eliminated in today's clashes. That's a significant reduction from what we're used to seeing, but it tells us something: Ukrainian forces are thinning out. In Kharkov, another 50 soldiers were lost, but here's the kicker: there were no reports of destroyed vehicles or artillery. Imagine that on a typical day, we'd expect tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery being taken out alongside the soldiers, but now, just men with no machines to back them up. This is an ominous sign that Ukraine is running low on both manpower and military hardware. Across the entire front line, Ukraine's losses include not just 1,850 soldiers, but also 4 heavy armored vehicles, including 2 tanks, one of which, a French AMX 10RC, proved to be about as useful as a toy soldier. This wheeled tank didn't even make it to the front lines before it was torn apart by Russian artillery fragments. The vehicle's thin armor is practically laughable compared to the robust Russian tanks on the battlefield. And let's not forget the rest: 15 artillery pieces destroyed, 1 self-propelled gun, 54 vehicles of various types obliterated, and 68 UAVs brought down. Ukrainian forces also lost 7 electronic warfare systems, which are crucial for coordinating their efforts, and a counter-battery radar system, leaving them blind to incoming Russian artillery. These aren't just numbers, folks. These are signs of an army losing its ability to fight. I think about it, if Ukraine keeps losing this many men and machines daily, how much longer can they sustain this? It's one thing to rely on NATO and the US for arms, but if you can't hold on to your soldiers or equipment, what's the point? At this rate, Ukraine is headed toward a breaking point. Now let's switch gears and look at how Russia continues its strategic advance on the northern front, securing 2 key villages in the Kursk region. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has repeatedly stressed how Ukrainian forces are increasingly overextended, and today's developments in Kursk perfectly illustrate that. In the north, Russian forces have once again demonstrated their tactical superiority. The villages of Novaya Novochina and Pokrovsky in the Kursk region were liberated today. That's right, not 1, but 2 villages fell back into Russian hands. These were key positions for Ukraine, meant to bolster their defenses, but in just 1 day, Russian forces broke through and reclaimed these vital territories. The strategic importance of these villages cannot be overstated. Not only do they secure our northern supply lines, but they also position Russian forces for future advances deeper into Ukrainian-held areas. It's not just about reclaiming land, it's about gaining a foothold that can be used to launch more significant offensives, and while Ukraine is losing ground, their logistical backbone is taking hit after hit. 4 major ammunition depots have been destroyed in this region alone. These depots weren't just for small arms, they housed critical supplies for Ukraine's artillery and armored forces. With these depots gone, Ukraine's ability to sustain its defense in this area has been crippled. And the blows didn't stop there. Russian forces also targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure, energy that directly supports their military-industrial complex. We're talking about factories that produce munitions, vehicles, and more. Without power, these factories will struggle to continue production, further degrading Ukraine's already dwindling war machine. And as if that wasn't enough, Russia's air defenses shot down yet another Ukrainian S-200 missile, which Ukraine had modified for ground attacks. It's almost embarrassing at this point. Ukraine's attempts to repurpose old Soviet equipment are failing spectacularly. They're desperate. And it shows. And while Ukraine struggles to maintain a presence in the north, we turn to the devastating news about their most prized air defense system, the Patriot, which was obliterated in Dnipro. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has often criticized the West's over-reliance on high-tech systems like the Patriot, and today we see why. Now for the main event, the destruction of Ukraine's Patriot air defense system in Dnipro. This was no ordinary strike, folks. We're talking about a precision-guided missile, the Russian Iskander, that took out an entire air defense complex in one fell swoop. And let me remind you, the Patriot isn't just any system, it's the crown jewel of Ukraine's NATO-supplied defenses. Or at least it was. The Iskander missile didn't just hit the Patriot system. Oh no, wiped out the whole package, 1 NPQ-65 radar, the NTPQ-104 radar control system, and let's not forget the entire crew manning the system. That's an entire battalion of Ukraine's finest air defense personnel. Gone. But that's not all. The surrounding vehicles, including lower altitude air defense systems meant to protect the Patriot, were destroyed as well. This strike took place in the village of Paysign, just a few kilometers south of Bakhmut, and about 100 kilometers from the front lines in Zaporizhia. The Patriot system was deployed here to protect Dnipro, an industrial hub crucial to Ukraine's war effort. The strategic importance of Dnipro cannot be overstated. It's a central location for railways, factories, and infrastructure that keeps Ukraine's military going. But now, with the Patriot system out of commission, that vital protection is gone. And here's the kicker, there's video evidence. UAV footage shows the precise moment the Iskander missile hit. And the aftermath is clear as day. This isn't just a blow to Ukraine's defenses, it's a message. No matter where Ukraine tries to hide these systems, Russia will find them and take them out. Patriot, IRIS-T, these systems are falling one by one. And while the skies are no longer safe for Ukraine, the seas have become equally dangerous as Russian forces target their supply lines at Odessa. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has long said that Ukraine's supply lines, especially by sea, would be a critical vulnerability. Well, the hits keep coming, and this time, they're on the sea. Odessa, one of Ukraine's key ports, has been the focus of a series of Russian missile strikes aimed at crippling their ability to receive and transport military supplies. Yesterday, a massive Ukrainian arms shipment was destroyed at Port 4 in Odessa. The Panamanian flagged ship, Sea Spirit, was unloading its NATO-supplied cargo when 2 Iskander missiles struck, causing an explosion that could be seen for miles. This wasn't just an arms shipment, this was a lifeline for Ukraine's military. The ship was carrying critical military supplies, and the secondary explosions tell us everything we need to know. This was a major blow to Ukraine's war effort. The strike also destroyed 2 Ukrainian border patrol vessels that were stationed nearby and injured 7 soldiers, including 2 from Ukraine's top intelligence unit. That's right, folks, this was no ordinary shipment. High-value, high-priority cargo now completely obliterated, and this is just the latest in a series of strikes. Since October 6th, Russia has hit 3 major ships carrying military supplies. The first was the Passera, a St. Kitts and Nevis flagged vessel at Port 22 in Juneau, which was completely destroyed. The second was the Optima, a Palu flagged ship at Port 10 in Odessa, which suffered a similar fate. The message is clear: Russia is systematically destroying Ukraine's ability to receive military aid by sea. Without these supply lines, Ukraine's military machine will grind to a halt. The West can keep sending weapons, but if they can't get them to the front lines, what's the point? Ukraine is being cut off from its lifelines, and the consequences will be devastating. And with their supply lines under attack, it's no surprise that Ukraine's air defenses are also failing at an alarming rate. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has frequently warned that Western air defense systems wouldn't stand up to the intensity of Russian attacks, and today we're seeing exactly what he predicted. Ukraine's reliance on Western air defense systems like the Patriot is proving to be a failure. If you had 4 Patriot systems strategically placed around Dnipro, Pavlohrad, Mykolaiv, and Kiev, you'd think Ukraine would have some semblance of air defense. But the reality is, it's more of an aluminum dome than an iron dome. The Patriot system has failed time and time again to stop Russian stealth aircraft like the Su-57 and S-70. Russian planes regularly enter Ukrainian airspace without detection, firing missiles at will. And now, with Russia's Iskander missiles wreaking havoc, Ukraine's air defense is crumbling. Even Germany's Iris-T systems are being wiped out, and Germany is scrambling to replace them. But at this point, it's too little, too late. With the skies, seas, and ground under Russian control, Ukraine's war effort is on the brink of collapse. Let's wrap up by looking at the bigger picture. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has consistently highlighted Russia's growing momentum, and the developments we've discussed today only reinforce that view. With Ukraine's air defense systems in ruins, naval supply lines cut, and catastrophic losses on the ground, Russia's momentum is unstoppable. The West can keep sending aid, but without soldiers and systems to use it, Ukraine's efforts are futile. President Zelensky's talk of victory by 2025 is nothing more than wishful thinking. The reality on the ground is clear: Russia's dominance is growing, and Ukraine is running out of options. It's only a matter of time before the scales tip completely. Stay tuned, comrades, as we continue to bring you the unfiltered truth of what's really happening on the battlefield.
Behind closed doors has made it very clear that if we authorize these long-range strikes, that Russia will come into a state of war with NATO and the United States, to put it bluntly. And that targets in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Germany, Slovakia, Romania, and potentially other states in the region will be taken under fire by the Russians. They will launch missiles and destroy infrastructure that is essential to the sustainment of U.S. forces and allied forces in Eastern Europe. And that's a war that for which we are not prepared. And I think that Secretary Austin has made that privately very clear to the leadership of the White House. And as a result, I think there has been a certain amount of sobriety regarding what needs to happen in Eastern Europe. There is now a realization that that war is lost, and that a simple addition of a few missiles isn't going to make any difference, but it could precipitate a war with Russia. And people who are dismissing that out of hand by saying, well, nothing's happened thus far, so nothing will happen in the future, are extremely irresponsible.
As Colonel Douglas Macgregor has pointed out numerous times, Ukraine's defensive strategy has always relied heavily on holding key positions like Uglidar. And now with Russia's recent advances, we're seeing that strategy fall apart. About 3 weeks ago, I made a bold prediction about Uglidar being the stage for major developments, and today we're watching it unfold with remarkable precision. Russia has not only struck a decisive blow in Ugledar, but this battle has triggered a domino effect across Ukraine's entire defensive line. It's as if Ukraine couldn't keep up, playing a frantic game of chess, where every move Russia makes only to realize that every piece they shift creates a new gap, a new vulnerability. Ugledar isn't just another town. It sits at the heart of Ukraine's defensive fabric, and losing it is akin to ripping a hole in a once solid tapestry. By taking control of Ugledar, Russia didn't just win a local victory, they set off a chain reaction that's reverberating throughout Ukraine's defense network. With each loss, Ukraine has been forced to transfer troops from one critical area to another, creating more openings for Russian forces to exploit. It's a vicious cycle, and Ukraine has no way out. Every brigade they move, every unit they redeploy, leaves another area exposed. We've seen this chaos unfold with the 72nd, 79th, and 77th Brigades, all suffering under the relentless assault of Russia's precision strikes. These brigades, once considered the backbone of Ukraine's defense in the region, have been decimated by the Russian U-waves and artillery. Russian strikes have not only shattered Ukrainian morale, but systematically dismantled their ability to mount any serious resistance. When entire brigades are getting picked apart by UAVs, you know the situation is dire. And now with their defenses weakening, we have to ask, why would Ukraine choose to abandon such a crucial stronghold like Ugledar? What does Ukraine gain by leaving behind such a strategically important position, only to try and defend Kursk or other areas where they are even more vulnerable? It speaks to the desperation of their leadership, scrambling to plug the gaps in their defenses, but finding they've run out of options. Let's be clear, Russia's actions in Ugledar are not just about this one battle. The capture of Ugledar represents a broader, more significant collapse of Ukraine's entire defense strategy. Russia's methodical, calculated approach is paying off, while Ukraine's scattered, reactionary tactics are falling apart. And why wouldn't they? Russia has learned, adapted, and evolved its tactics. Ukraine, on the other hand, is playing catch-up, constantly reacting but never able to truly regain control of the battlefield. But this collapse isn't limited to Ugledar alone. Russia's strategic breakthroughs here are sending shockwaves across the entire front. Let's take a closer look at how this is affecting Ukraine's overall strength. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has often spoken about how Ukraine's forces are being stretched too thin, and nowhere is that more evident than in their attempts to hold the line across multiple fronts. The larger picture is becoming clearer each day. Ukraine is running out of both time and resources. Their forces, once hailed as highly effective in defensive warfare, are now showing signs of extreme fatigue and depletion. And why wouldn't they be? After months of relentless Russian advances, Ukrainian forces are left scrambling to plug the holes in a collapsing defense network. The problem is they've run out of fingers to plug those holes with. Let's talk about the geography of this war. Russian forces are breaking through some of the most heavily fortified positions Ukraine had, positions that were supposed to hold for months, if not longer. And yet, here we are. Russia has punched through these defenses like they were nothing more than a thin veil. With every breakthrough, Russian forces inch closer to the Dnieper River. And with that, the Ukrainian defensive positions behind these lines are becoming increasingly irrelevant. As Russia continues its steady advance toward key positions like Zaporizhia and Dnipro, Ukraine's options are narrowing by the day. Once Russian forces secure the Zaporizhia-Dnipro-Pavlograd triangle, the door to any meaningful Ukrainian defense along the Dnieper River will slam shut. Ukraine will be forced to retreat or face annihilation. This isn't speculation, it's what's happening on the ground as we speak. Russian forces, by securing these key areas, will have gained the strategic upper hand on a scale that will be nearly impossible for Ukraine to overcome. Ukraine's forces are exhausted, and it's showing in every retreat and every failed counteroffensive. Their troops are tired, their equipment is dwindling, and their ability to defend key positions is faltering. Let's be honest, there's not much left Ukraine can do at this point. The terrain is flat, offering little in the way of natural defenses. The fortifications that once held the line are either gone or crumbling. The only thing Ukraine can do now is keep retreating, hoping to find a place where they can regroup, but even that is starting to seem like a distant possibility. And as Ukraine's strength fades, the losses they are suffering become even more staggering. Let's break down the numbers that are sealing Ukraine's fate. As Colonel Macgregor has emphasized time and again, wars of attrition are won by those who can sustain the fight longer, and in this case, Ukraine's resources are drying up fast. We need to talk about the numbers because they paint a picture that words alone can't fully capture. In Kursk, over 300 Ukrainian soldiers were removed from the battlefield in a single engagement. These are not small losses, they represent entire units being wiped out. On top of that, Ukraine lost 2 armored vehicles and 1 artillery piece alongside 5 other vehicles. It's a significant blow, not just to Ukraine's fighting capability, but to their overall strategy in this area. These losses are becoming routine for Ukraine, and that's the real problem. They can't afford for this level of attrition to become normal. In Kharkiv, the losses were only 75 soldiers, but as we've seen, it's a pattern of constant depletion. In Kupiansk, after months of intense fighting, Ukrainian casualties have finally dropped below 400 per day. It might seem like a relief for Ukraine, but let's not forget they've been losing 500 to 700 soldiers every day for months in this region. This is a war of attrition, and Ukraine is losing. And then there's Bakhmut, the bloodiest battlefield of them all. Yesterday, 900 Ukrainian soldiers lost their lives in Bakhmut alone. Today, that number has dropped to 855, but these are still devastating losses. In Pokrovsk case, 720 Ukrainian soldiers fell yesterday, and today another 630. When you add it all up, Ukraine is losing nearly 2,500 soldiers in just a 24-hour period. These numbers are staggering, and they're not sustainable. Ukraine's total casualty count from yesterday, a mind-numbing 2,420 soldiers. These aren't just numbers, these are lives, entire units and strategic capabilities being wiped out day after day. And Ukraine has no way to replenish these losses. The reality is clear, they are being bled dry on every front, and the situation is only getting worse. But the losses don't end with manpower. The depletion of Ukraine's equipment is equally devastating, and that's what we'll explore next. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has repeatedly stressed that without adequate equipment, any army, no matter how well trained, is bound to fail. Ukraine is learning this lesson the hard way. While the loss of soldiers is catastrophic for Ukraine, their dwindling supply of equipment is just as concerning. Yesterday, Ukraine lost 5 heavy armored vehicles. That's far below the average they've been losing, but this is no sign of improvement, it's a sign of desperation. They're simply running out of vehicles to lose. Their armored columns, once a symbol of strength, are now a shadow of what they used to be. The same goes for their artillery losses. Yesterday, Ukraine lost 14 self-propelled guns, half of what they normally lose in a day. But when you're down to losing this much artillery on a regular basis, it's a sign that your ability to defend key positions is faltering. And the vehicles? Ukraine lost 34 of them yesterday, also below average, but still significant. Then there are the U-Waves, minus 32 of them shot down, further eroding Ukraine's ability to conduct reconnaissance and coordinate strikes. One of the most telling signs of Ukraine's equipment shortage is the loss of 5 electronic warfare systems, including advanced platforms like Enclave and Bukoval. These systems are critical to disrupting Russian operations, and without them, Ukraine is losing the ability to interfere with Russia's communications and targeting systems. It's not just about losing vehicles and artillery, it's about losing the tools that keep the battlefield manageable. With the southern front under increasing Russian control, and with Verkhovno-Kupiansk completely liberated, Ukrainian forces are losing both their defensive capabilities and their operational support systems. Yesterday, 8 of their ammunition depots were destroyed, along with key energy infrastructure that supports their military efforts. This isn't just a tactical defeat, it's a strategic dismantling of Ukraine's ability to fight. Now let's go back to Ugliyar, where Russia's latest victory is setting the stage for the next phase of this war.
Secretary Austin in Kyiv, face-to-face with former president, still claiming to hold office, Zelensky, said, here's another 400 million for you. Isn't that right down a rat hole?
Well, of course it is, but 400 million is chump change. We've wasted billions and billions and billions of dollars. We have no idea how much we've wasted. We know that a large portion of the equipment, some people say as much as a third, some say 25%, that we have provided to the Ukrainians is being resold on the black market to other buyers. And this money will certainly subsidize the government and the leadership of the military. Everybody asks, well, why haven't the Ukrainian generals stepped forward and been heard? Well, they're being well paid. Why does the parliament stand up and give Zelensky a standing ovation? They're all well paid. This is one giant grift.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Kursk offensive has become a major turning point in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. 3 months have passed since this offensive began, and instead of achieving its strategic goals, Ukraine now faces severe military and economic setbacks that threaten the very existence of the Ukrainian state. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor observed, this battle demonstrates the folly of Ukraine's strategy under Western influence. Kursk has turned into a disaster for Ukraine as Russian forces maintain their iron grip, gradually dismantling Kiev's war efforts piece by piece. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, Ukraine has deployed 11 elite brigades out of its 36 combat brigades, supported by state-of-the-art weaponry from the US. And NATO. Confident in their numerical strength and Western backing, Ukrainian forces rushed into Kursk, hoping for a decisive breakthrough. But instead, they walked straight into a Russian trap. On the Eastern Front, Russian forces peel away layers of Ukrainian defenses, inching closer to the twin cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. With Donetsk and Luhansk already within reach, their full liberation is only a matter of time. There is no doubt now Ukraine's gamble in Kursk was a colossal error, and NATO's strategic miscalculation only adds to Kiev's deepening crisis. But this military failure is just the beginning. Ukraine now faces even bigger consequences off the battlefield. On October 21st, 2024, President Zelensky admitted during an interview with the Financial Times that Ukraine is ready to negotiate, but only if Russia halts airstrikes on its energy infrastructure and cargo vessels. This desperate plea reflects the dire economic reality Kiev now faces. Zelensky is asking for Russia's mercy, hoping for humanitarian relief to signal a path toward peace talks. But let's be realistic. Ukraine itself violated multiple agreements in the past, and now it pleads for diplomacy as if Russia will suddenly forget everything. As President Putin once warned, Russia's terms will only grow harsher with every betrayal. In this game, only surrender will bring results. Let's rewind to late 2022 when Russia launched targeted strikes on Ukraine's electrical substations. These attacks forced Ukraine to expose its advanced S-300 air defense systems, which allowed Russia to systematically destroy these assets over the fall and winter months. In 2023 and 2024, Ukraine retaliated by sending drones to target Russian oil refineries, temporarily disrupting fuel production and halting exports. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor emphasized, Russia's methodical approach in neutralizing Ukraine's air defenses was key to shifting the balance of power. Now the focus has shifted entirely to destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Russia responded swiftly by escalating strikes on Ukraine's power grid, no longer focusing on air defenses, but crippling Ukraine's entire energy infrastructure. This time, not only substations, but large power plants were targeted, leaving non-nuclear electricity production in ruins. However, just as Ukraine's economy teetered on collapse, a diplomatic lifeline seemed to emerge in Doha. In August 2024, Russia and Ukraine were scheduled to meet in Doha, Qatar, in what seemed like a last-ditch attempt to end attacks on each other's infrastructure. The Washington Post reported that these talks represented a rare glimmer of hope, with negotiators on both sides exploring terms for a partial ceasefire. The agreement would focus on protecting critical infrastructure, particularly energy networks and ports. This was seen as an opportunity to de-escalate the conflict and reduce the mounting economic strain on both nations. However, those hopes were shattered when Ukraine, instead of waiting for diplomacy to run its course, launched a surprise attack on Kursk. This offensive not only violated the spirit of the negotiations, but also confirmed Russia's long-standing concerns about Ukraine's unreliability at the negotiation table. The Doha talks, already fragile, collapsed immediately. Any trust in future peace negotiations evaporated, leaving both sides entrenched deeper in their respective positions. For Russia, the message was clear: diplomacy would no longer be an option. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor pointed out, Kiev's continuous preference for escalation over diplomacy only ensured that the conflict would drag on with increasingly harsh consequences for Ukraine. And with peace off the table, Russia's focus turned to the Black Sea, where a new front in economic warfare was about to unfold. Following the failure of the Doha negotiations, Russia withdrew from the Black Sea grain agreement and swiftly reimposed a naval blockade on Ukrainian ports. This move effectively severed Ukraine's access to global markets, cutting off vital exports of grain and other commodities. Under the leadership of Defense Minister Belousov, Russia escalated its campaign by targeting Ukraine's Dark Fleet, a covert network of 22 civilian cargo ships used to smuggle weapons disguised as grain shipments. Over the next few months, Russian Iskander missiles precisely targeted and destroyed these vessels, most of which were anchored in Odessa and surrounding ports. This operation dealt a devastating blow to Ukraine's logistical network. The destruction of the Dark Fleet confirmed what Colonel Douglas Macgregor had warned about earlier, that Ukraine's over-reliance on covert Western-backed operations left it increasingly exposed to Russian retaliation. Now, no insurer in the world is willing to cover ships heading to Ukraine, as the lethal precision of Russian strikes has turned the Black Sea into a danger zone. With shipping routes compromised and ports under constant threat, Ukraine's trade routes have effectively vanished, deepening the economic chokehold imposed by Russia. With Ukraine's maritime options dwindling, the course of the war now shifts decisively toward winter's looming threat and Kyiv's missed opportunities for peace. Throughout this conflict, Ukraine had at least 3 key chances to pursue peace, but each time it chose escalation over diplomacy, leaving the path to surrender as its only remaining option. The first opportunity came with the Istanbul Agreement in March 2022, brokered by Turkey. This was Ukraine's best chance to negotiate a favorable settlement and end the conflict early, but Zelensky, under Western pressure, rejected the deal, convinced that more Western military aid would change the tide of the war. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of the UK, was even reported to have personally intervened to block the agreement, ensuring Ukraine stayed on a war footing. The second missed opportunity was the Black Sea Grain Agreement, a critical lifeline for Ukraine's economy. But instead of honoring the agreement, Ukraine exploited these commercial routes to launch military operations, using cargo ships as makeshift platforms for drone and missile attacks on Russian targets. This violation caused Russia to pull out of the agreement and reimpose a strict blockade, shutting down Ukraine's last viable trade routes. Finally, the Doha talks in August 2024 were poised to offer a way out of the conflict, with both sides prepared to negotiate an end to attacks on infrastructure. However, Ukraine sabotaged these efforts by launching its offensive on Kursk, leaving Russia with no incentive to return to the negotiating table. As winter rapidly approaches, Ukraine faces the full brunt of its decisions. The economy is crumbling, infrastructure is in ruins, and Western support is faltering. As Colonel Douglas Macgregor has noted, the consequences of Kyiv's missteps are now unavoidable. No more diplomatic lifelines remain. Russia's message is clear. The war will only end when Ukraine surrenders. And with winter descending upon a battered Ukraine, the window for survival is closing, rapidly leaving Kyiv to face the harsh reality of unconditional surrender. In Moldova, the first round of the presidential elections has come to a close, and while incumbent President Maya Sandu leads the race, she did not secure the necessary 50% of the vote to win outright. As a result, Moldova is now heading for a second round of elections, where Sandu will face off against her closest rival. The stakes are high for Moldova, with the country deeply divided between those seeking European integration and those favoring a more neutral stance to avoid antagonizing Russia. Sandu, known for her pro-European platform, enjoys strong backing from Western countries, but many in Moldova's rural areas and older voters remain skeptical of such alignment, fearing that closer ties to the West could lead to economic instability and social upheaval. What complicates matters further are allegations of Russian interference. Western sources claim that Moscow has attempted to influence the election, but initial results reveal that a large share of Sandu's support comes from the Moldovan diaspora abroad, especially from those living in Western Europe. This highlights how the Moldovan diaspora plays a decisive role, with many overseas voters pushing for reforms and closer alignment with the European Union. However, Russia's influence still casts a long shadow over Moldova. The second round will undoubtedly become a battleground for Moldova's future direction, whether it follows the path toward European integration or remains cautious in its geopolitical stance. The fear of Russian economic retaliation or the possibility of internal unrest looms large, adding further pressure to the already tense election process. As the election campaign intensifies ahead of the second round, regional tensions grow. Moldova must navigate this politically volatile landscape, and the outcome could shape its foreign policy for years to come. While Moldova braces for its decisive second round, nearby Georgia plunges deeper into political turmoil after its own contentious election results. Over in Georgia, the ruling party, Georgian Dream, has declared victory in the recent parliamentary elections, defying pressure from Western-backed opposition groups. However, the opposition coalition, which includes President Salam Zurabishvili, has refused to recognize the results, alleging election fraud and manipulation. Tensions are running high, with Zurabishvili and other opposition leaders calling for mass protests on October 28th to contest the legitimacy of the vote. The political landscape in Georgia is becoming increasingly polarized, with Western powers supporting opposition factions and pushing for pro-EU reforms. But public sentiment, as reflected in the election, shows a clear tilt toward pro-Russian policies. The victory of Georgian Dream signals that many Georgian voters prefer stability over integration with the European Union, fearing that Western interference could destabilize the country further. This creates significant obstacles for Georgia's EU membership ambitions, adding to its ongoing political struggle. Kaka Kaladze, the Secretary General of Georgian Dream, emphasized that their election victory reflects the will of the people and dismissed Western concerns about the country's drift toward Russia. This shift in public sentiment highlights how ordinary voters are prioritizing economic security over political alliances, favoring neutrality and stability over the uncertain promises of EU integration. Adding to the complexity are the breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which continue to play a critical role in Georgia's geopolitical dynamics. These regions, which enjoy Russian support, remain potential flashpoints for future conflicts, further complicating Georgia's relationship with both Russia and the West. The upcoming protests on October 28th are expected to be a pivotal moment. If unrest spreads, the political crisis could deepen, weakening the government and derailing the country's fragile stability. The situation is already volatile, with both sides entrenched in their positions, leaving little room for compromise. Colonel Douglas Macgregor has previously warned about Georgia's geopolitical vulnerability, noting that external pressures from the West and internal divisions make it difficult for the country to chart an independent course. As Georgia continues to walk a fine line between Russia and the EU, its political future hangs in the balance. With Moldova heading into a second round of elections and Georgia teetering on the brink of political unrest, the region faces a period of profound uncertainty, one where Russia's influence remains a dominant force. As these elections in Moldova and Georgia unfold, it's clear that the regional dynamics are shifting, with Russia's influence growing, while Western-backed initiatives meet increasing resistance. Moldova's second round will decide its political future, while Georgia's unrest could spiral into widespread protests, further complicating the region's already volatile political landscape. Stay tuned as we continue to bring updates on these developments and track the latest shifts in this critical geopolitical battleground.